Okay, good afternoon. My name is Prasad Sankaran. I'm the global lead for cloud and infrastructure at Accenture. I want to welcome you all to our panel discussion today. Our panel discussion is New IT for New Pharma, Cloud as a Catalyst for Sanofi Innovation. So this afternoon, what we're going to do is have a discussion with our panelists, and we're going to really hear about an amazing 10-year journey in which Sanofi and Accenture participated to achieve 80% data center consolidation and to deliver more than 50% of IT savings. So I'm going to start by introducing my panelists here. So first with us today from Sanofi is Stefan Marchini, who's the Global Head of Enterprise Computing and Cloud Services Global. So Stefan, you will add some more on that.
Yes, a few words to introduce myself. So, as you said, I am in charge of an entity called Enterprise Computing and Cloud Services. So basically, I am in charge of some IT domains starting from the data centers to some applications layer like database, middleware, all the infrastructures, some specific applications like SAP, and also in charge of our cloud strategy and transformation program that we started soon and on which we are going to discuss today.
So also with us is Philippe Chauffard, who's part of our cloud and infrastructure group and heads all of our business in Europe. So Philippe.
Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. So Philippe Chauffard, I lead our cloud business for Accenture in Europe. Obviously looking after, some of our main clients, and partnering with, some key ones, Sanofi being, one of our major clients in France.
Okay, so just to add a couple of more points on the work we're doing at Sanofi. So we're now working together on an ambitious migration that's going to take 11,000 servers to AWS. And Sanofi is a $34 billion European leader in healthcare, headquartered in France, and has over 100,000 employees globally and 75 manufacturing plants in 33 countries. So obviously a very global footprint. And Accenture being one of the largest AWS systems integrators, we've been involved with AWS for the last decade, and so we were engaged on this particular project. My group that I and Philippe are part of is about 30,000 people globally, and what we look to do is to help our clients really achieve digital transformation. We have a leadership position, obviously, which is acknowledged by top analysts around public cloud. We've been doing that for the best part of the last decade. And we've also really taken a hard look at infrastructure as such and how we want to reimagine infrastructure and the things that we need to do around network and workplace in support of public cloud and also the emergence of things like edge and IoT, et cetera. So what we're going to do now is go through a series of discussion points with Stefan and Philippe. And since we have a group here that's not as big, what I would suggest is rather than wait at the end for Q&A, which there'll be time for Q&A at the end anyway, but if you have a question in the middle, please just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you and then we can keep it interactive. So with that, I'm going to start with the first question to both Stefan and Philippe. The first question is, the relationship between Accenture and Sanofi started about 10 years ago. Will you tell us how that relationship got started? And Stefan, let's start with you.
Well, 10 years ago, maybe I will need your help because I was not working for Sanofi 10 years ago. What I can share with you is that we started an ambitious program 10 years ago, which was basically to consolidate all the different data centers we were having at Sanofi globally in 3 big data centers and introduce, at that time, virtualization. So we were not speaking about cloud 10 years ago. It was more virtualization. And the idea was really to reduce our footprint, manage a quite important legacy debt we had at the time, and also, as I said, to remediate a part of the applications and consolidate these applications on the 3 data centers, 1 per region, 1 in the US, 1 in France, and 1 in Singapore, increasing our level of virtualization. So if I'm correct, we reached something like 90% of virtualization, relying on mainly VMware at that time. And also, we try to use this transformation as a lever to recode, replatform, change some of the applications we were using in order to make them more agile. But again, it was 10 years ago, nothing to do with cloud. And basically, we lived with this architecture during the last 10 years. And with no major changes. That's why our legacy debt increased again. And that's why also we decided to start together, partnering with Accenture, a new big transformation program, officially started this summer. And in that new program, we are going to do a very big focus on cloud. It will be, as we used to say, a cloud-first program. Our target, as you say, but I'm going to detail a bit more, what we want to do is to move 60% of our workloads on the public cloud. So we decided to work with 2 public cloud providers. So of course, AWS is one of these 2 public cloud providers, and we also decided to work with Google. And we made this decision based on criteria that I will discuss with you just later. But the idea was really to rely on 2 big providers, not only one, but on the other side, no more than 2. Another decision we took is that because not all our workloads can be migrated to the cloud, we are working for a pharma company. The regulation is quite significant, and we cannot do whatever we want. So we have regulatory issues and constraints. So we also decided for these reasons and also for technical reasons to build our own private cloud. Something simple and pragmatic. I had the opportunity in the past to work on other private cloud implementation, and the idea was really not to reproduce the mistakes we did in the past, trying to integrate not very mature technologies with many layers. And the idea here is really to build something very simple, reliable, and pragmatic, on which we are going to move the workloads that cannot be moved to the public cloud. And for the 20 remaining percent, we are going to rely on traditional IT, again, because we have some, as you said, some plants in many different countries. We have some very proprietary and specific applications that are used to manage supply chains and this kind of things in the plants. And for these specific applications, of course, we cannot, or it's very difficult due to the proprietary part of these applications to move them on the public cloud or the private cloud. So we are going to, we estimated that we are going to remain at 20% on what we call traditional IT.
So Philippe, your view from the Accenture perspective?
Well, obviously, Stéphane has said a lot already, but I think going back a decade, right? I think Sanofi was really at the leading edge 10 years ago, right? In terms of the level of ambition, in terms of driving, the consolidation, the virtualization of the data center. Some amazing results actually were achieved back then, right? Jointly between Sanofi and Accenture in terms of really driving a huge consolidation, standardization, and driving that, across all of the entire estate on a global basis, right? Obviously, over the last 10 years, there have been, some evolutions, in the operating model as well, in terms of the, what Sanofi was doing, what we were doing. But fundamentally, it was, more or less, a very similar infrastructure and architecture, right? And I think it was now time to really kind of write the next chapter, right? And I think the program that we've jointly just embarked on is really going to be the next level of ambition, right? And I think not only in terms of the level of transformation and migration to AWS to the public cloud, the level of also driving much more common approach in terms of automation, analytics, across the entire IT, but also some of the operational system as well. Because I think that's going to be the next, the next level of ambition as well. So I think, it's a very exciting journey. I think there are going to be a few challenges along the way. I think it's going to be very interesting, right? But I think that was really the right time to go and embark on the next chapter.
So Stéphane, when we've talked before, you've mentioned that, IT wasn't keeping pace with the demands of the enterprise. So given that, can you tell us a little bit about the overall scope of what you're trying to achieve?
Yes. As I said, 60% of our workload represent, I think you mentioned the figure, moving to the cloud, roughly 11 workloads that we have today on-prem, out of a scope which is representing roughly 30,000 workloads today that we are having at Sanofi, running mainly on the data centers we have, plus also on many plants we have everywhere in the world. We are also leveraging more and more some DevOps platform. So we are finalizing to build our own DevOps platform, building this solution on some very famous components of the market. So basically, starting from GitLab to Terraform, Ansible, and other specific tools that are interconnected all together to build this pipeline. And our objective is to use as much as we can this pipeline when we are going to transform applications. The idea is not to only rehost and reinstall applications in the public cloud. The idea is really to use this transformation program as a lever to transform as many applications as we can by doing replatforming, basically, by doing also by using more and more containers. We have our own OpenShift platform, which is interconnected with the DevOps one I just mentioned, and today which is deployed both on-prem and on AWS. And we are starting discussing with all the application teams in order to identify which application should be eligible to this type of replatforming. We are also leveraging a big program we launched a few months ago in order to tackle our legacy debt, because as many big companies, our legacy debt is quite significant and increasing month after month. Keeping the pace of the transformation of the new technologies to support all the new releases that are coming to the market is quite difficult. So we really use this legacy management program as a lever and a driver to identify which applications are running on legacy components and are eligible to be more than replatformed and rehosted, but really recoding and transformed in order to really leverage cloud-native solutions. Again, it's long and sometimes difficult, as you said, discussions with the business, because when you are just replatforming or recoding an application without providing new features, new enhancements to the business, it's sometimes difficult to explain that it will, at the end, even if the application is not changing, it will really provide value. And this is what we are currently doing. We are ending the detailed application assessment on all our 3,000 applications we have today at Sanofi with Accenture, which is part of the overall transformation program. And the idea is really, as part of this detailed application assessment, to identify, using the 6R methodology, which applications are eligible to the cloud, but also which applications can be moved, as I said, by doing a rehost, a reinstall, a replatform, and ideally sometimes a recode, and onboarding as much as we can the business in order to be sure that they will be part of this transformation.
Okay. So question for both of you. We were talking about this yesterday, and you were mentioning that there are some key elements to your transformation to the cloud. You mentioned digital workplace, agility, and obviously I think you talked about the two partners briefly. But can you add some more context to those three pillars?
Yeah. When you say two partners, you mean AWS and GCP?
Yeah.
So yes, indeed, we decided. 1 year ago, when we started looking at the public cloud market, we decided rapidly to focus on only two providers. The first, and maybe the main reason, is that because we want to have internal skills to build the foundations, to make them up to date, be sure that what we are building will keep running in the long term. Having multiple cloud providers require to upskill many people on different technologies, different type of skills, and the idea was really, we even did a 3-year TCO to estimate what should be the cost to build and operate and maintain one public cloud provider. The amount was quite important, let's say multiple millions. And based on that, we said that having two public cloud providers should be enough. And then we started looking at the different ones today in the market. And we rapidly see a complementarity between some of them. And that's why, based on this complementarity, we decided to select AWS and GCP. And we also conducted an interesting exercise, which was to identify from the very beginning the criteria to say that an application or a business should go to AWS or to GCP. And we did this exercise looking not at the technical aspect of the applications, but more business aspect. And we looked at the different businesses we are having at Sanofi. So basically, like all big pharma companies, we are all types of businesses that you may know, starting from R&D, clinical trial, manufacturing, supply chain, commercials, marketing, and so on. So these are the, let's say, the main pillars, plus all the corporate functions that you have in big companies like Sanofi. And based on these different, what we call business units, including the corporate ones, we worked with the businesses in order to look at their strategy, some partnerships that they should already have with some of these partners. And it was the case, for example, on R&D with Google. We signed 6 months ago a big partnership in order to work on innovation and R&D. We also looked at an interesting and important element, which is what should be the integration between the applications when tomorrow they will be running on different public cloud providers. You all know that the cost of the network is something which is most of the time forgotten when you build a business case on the cloud, but it's something that can cost rapidly a lot of money, especially when you need to exchange data between public cloud providers. So it was also a criteria which helped us taking this decision. And just to focus 2 minutes on the data, all the business units I was mentioning are having today their own, we cannot say data lake because some are looking like data lake, some are not even data lake, but this is where the trend is going and where these businesses want to grow. And the idea was also to identify using some criteria on the data they are using and the data they may exchange between the different business units, which one should be located on AWS and which one should be located on GCP. Based on all these criteria, we built the matrix, and today we have, I think, a clear vision of which businesses, which applications should go on the right and which should go on the left. And it's also something we integrated in the detailed application assessment I was mentioning just before, in order also when we are working with the business to qualify the transformation of the application, of their application that we want to conduct, be sure that they are aligned with our strategy and understand why we took this decision.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, maybe just to add a couple of comments, right? I think, back to what Stefan was alluding to, I think probably the biggest challenge is not around the technical, technology implementation, right? This is really about, how to drive the momentum, with the business units, with the lines of business to get the adoption, right? I mean, very often, in the past, there have been a lot of question marks around, what's the business case, if any, for, doing lift and shift. I think here, the level of the transformation, I think it's a much more, a wider spectrum from the re-hosting to re-platforming to, going cloud native. And I think that's the approach that makes sense. And I think, moving forward, it will really be, about being able to, to drive the whole spectrum. But nevertheless, right, it is about, really engaging the businesses, the application owners as quickly and as early as possible to be able to drive that momentum jointly, right? Because otherwise, you may have the most wonderful migration machine, but then it becomes very challenging to actually, churn the volumes through that migration engine. And I think that, for me, that is, probably the biggest challenge of any similar such project. The other comment I wanted to make, and I think that's, I think from that perspective, I think the approach that Sanofi has taken for me is really, a great example in terms of, looking at, the cloud providers from an application lens and from a application placement or, a function placement, not, a pure, volume arbitrage or capacity arbitrage. I don't believe that this is the right approach. I think the approach that Sanofi has taken for me is exactly the right approach, looking at, where the data, where are some of the business capabilities, and then working with the businesses on where is the right landing zone for that. So for me, again, I think that's really a best practice on how to go about that.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, the technology is one aspect of it, but there are other considerations as well. And you talked about, working with the business. But equally, and I'd like both of you to answer it from your perspectives, the point around upskilling and making sure that our people are ready, as you're completing this journey. So if you can, give your perspective on that, and internally as well, our own rotation to the new, and you're leading that for us within our group, Philippe. So Stefan, if you want to start.
You're right that upskilling is a key topic of such transformation. Especially in our case, the main reason is very simple. As I said, our legacy debt is quite important, and today we don't have so many people with the right skills. I mentioned DevOps, I mentioned some technical solutions, I mentioned public cloud and so on. And today we have very few people with these skills at Sanofi. That's also why when we started this journey, we worked a lot with Accenture. We built a cloud center of excellence in order to onboard people from Accenture, work with people from Sanofi, start the upskilling of these people on all the technical pillars that are really important to build such transformation program. However, having a cloud center of excellence with few people from Accenture is great, but first I think it's not enough, and I think it's not a sustainable model. We also decided that it was important for us to be rapidly autonomous, and even if I like very much what we are doing with Accenture, one day we should be able to do what we have to do without you. And that's why we decided to launch a big upskilling program. So we very recently finalized an RFP process, and we selected 2 companies that are going to work with us, partnering in this upskilling program. So starting 2 weeks ago until end of January, we are going to do the first phase of this upskilling program. We are going to work with these 2 companies. They are going to define the curriculum. They are going to start the onboarding of the different teams, identify who should be trained, the different level of expertise we want to acquire, the different technologies on which we are currently working, and on which it's important to train people and to upskill people. And starting February, we are going to launch the first wave of upskilling, but the idea is really to upskill a very large number of people at Sanofi, not only the technical people, typically from my team, but also to work with the application team in order for them to be also upskilled. When I mentioned the DevOps pipeline we are building, at the end, we are just providing the tools and the methodologies and the standard to use the DevOps pipeline. But at the end, it will be important for all the application team to understand what it means to become agile. How do you use the DevOps pipeline in order to be sure that the way they are going to transform their application will satisfy the prerequisites of this pipeline. And to do so, they need to be upskilled. They need to understand how it works. So it's going to be a long journey in parallel of the transformation, the technical transformation we are doing. But clearly, this upskilling program is very important. And one last point, because I mentioned this upskilling program, and I also mentioned some technical activities on which we are going to upskill our team. But another very important pillar is the soft skills. The technical part is not maybe the most difficult one. I think that upskilling people on the soft skills is clearly the most difficult, the more important. But if we want tomorrow to have all our associates at Sanofi onboarded, passionate by the transformation we are doing, it's also important to work on this specific pillar, being sure that they understand what it means to become agile. We are relying too much, from my standpoint, on the old V model and the waterfall model. Agile, for a big company like Sanofi, is not applicable to everything. We clearly see that on a daily basis on some specific projects, program. We need to use the classical V model that we all know. But switching from this V model, this waterfall model, to agile is not an easy thing. We will define and we will develop new role that we don't have today at Sanofi, like a Scrum Master, like product owners, in order really to be sure that on top of the technical upskilling that we are doing, people will also understand what it will work to mean in agile team, in virtual team, and be sure that this will be part of the transformation we are doing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge topic, right? I think for me there are 2 dimensions. So I think the first one is around the talent, the skills themselves, right? And I think, obviously, there's a big need, in enterprises, but also internally in us, to drive, the whole set of new skills, right? And again, I think that go beyond the cloud team or the infrastructure team, right? We need to cut across, the application teams, but even, we can argue even some of the business in the line of business people, they need to really, understand what this is all about, right? Because that has a profound impact on the possibilities of what can be done, right? But again, it needs to have that kind of push and pull effect. You know, you need to upskill and upgrade the entire organization. That's the first point. And the second, you know, related to that, and we are doing that in Accenture as well, right? In our teams, you know, Prasad mentioned our 30,000, you know, cloud and infrastructure people. You know, we have to constantly make sure that, you know, we do evolve. You know, we do that transformation of talent. Not only because we need the new skills to deliver the service and the capabilities to our clients, but also because this is the only way we will be able to recruit, attract, and retain the people, right? I'm sure you all face in your respective organization the same challenges that we do and Sanofi does in terms of being able to recruit and retain, you know, the key cloud talent. You know, it is very, very challenging out there. And part of the value propositions we need to, provide and ensure to our people is that they will constantly be able to, evolve their talent, gain new skills, and especially with the pace of technology today. I mean, for me, that's not a one-off, right? It's not, we do a transformation of talent today, and then, in 6 months we're done. We can all go and relax to the beach. It's just not going to work like this, right? That's just will never be done. So that's the first part around the skills. The second part, which is probably even more difficult in my mind, is, the operating model changes. Traditionally, but probably still the case today in most organizations, it's still very much horizontal, can't call it silos, right? I guess if it's horizontal, it's not really silos. But anyway, it's, you've got the infrastructure team, then you've got the apps team, and then you've got the business owners and so forth, right? And, and for the last, few decades, those have been fairly, disjointed teams, right? With requirements being thrown over the fence and, people complaining back and forth, it's too slow, too rigid, and so forth. And, trying to suddenly, first of all, shift from a horizontal to a more vertical model, more integrated, from the service to the applications to the underlying infrastructure, and, adopting much more, agile DevOps type practices kind of totally breaks down that model, right? And most organizations today are in that kind of, struggling in the middle of that transformation. How do they do that? How do they change the people, upskill the people? How do they start, breaking down some of those barriers, and at the same time continuing running the day-to-day business? And that's a big challenge, right? So I think for me, well beyond the technology challenges, right? For me, those are probably the two biggest challenges we are going to face as an industry as we drive some more massive transformations.
If I may add something, Philippe, the difficulty does not come only from the people. I think that when you are in a big company like Sanofi, another big difficulty we are facing are the processes that are in place. And even if the people are in the right mindset, even if the people want to work in the agile way and so on, we need to, or we have to stick to these processes because it is the way it's working in big companies. And I think it's also an important topic on which we have to work from the very beginning. It's to be clear with everybody that these processes will have to be reworked, will have to change. Again, not for everything. Agile cannot be applicable to everything, but we need maybe two types of processes, one for the old traditional world and one for Agile. It's exactly what we are facing today. We launched recently in my team 3 pilots. We integrated people from the application teams, not from the business, but at least from the 2 first layers you were mentioning, and it's working very well. People are very happy to work together. It's very efficient. They are doing sprints on a bi-weekly basis and so on. They are delivering MVPs, so no technical issues, no people issues. As soon as we need to explain that we will not follow some specific internal process, problems arrive. And this is also something that are most of the time forgotten and on which I think it's really important to work.
So, Philippe, maybe you can talk a little bit about Accenture's role, both from a standpoint of helping in defining and putting together the transform, but also the run aspect of it, because you have both sides of it. So, maybe you can talk a little bit about the different skills and the role we played over the past few years.
Yeah. So obviously, going back, again, a very long-term, journey together with Sanofi and relationship, right? And obviously, we've been in all the phases of that program and, moving forward as well. We've been both a transformation partner as well as an operational partner, right? So we worked together with Sanofi during the initial, transformation, consolidation, virtualization, rationalization of the Sanofi landscape on a global basis, and then basically running the outsourcing services, so running the managed service around the whole data center services. I think for me, one of the key aspects, over the last 6-8 months, as if we've kind of worked together in terms of shaping, designing, and architecting, kind of the next chapter together, right? And I think for me, that is what I see more and more. And I think, again, that's, as an industry, for me, that is very, very important, right? It's, I think the days of, the 3,000 pages RFPs, and the very sourcing-led procurement processes. Yes, there's still some of that out there, right? But I think for me, the future is really around, much more, design thinking, design co-creation, co-design, and really kind of shaping that together, right? And I think from that perspective, I think that has been a great example, because we had, really, one team together working on, driving the transformation, and at the same, or defining, the next chapter of the transformation, to the public cloud and so forth, and at the same time looking at how to drastically change the operations, right? Because I think, yes, you can drive, the migration, you can move, a significant percentage to the public cloud, but unless you fundamentally change the way you drive the operations, both of the traditional environment as the cloud, in terms of, driving, a relentless focus on automation, basically leveraging analytics, looking at ways to, drive some infusion of AI, in terms of, moving from a reactive to much more predictive, proactive models in the operations, you will not get the benefits, right? So for me, you cannot look at migration or transformation in isolation to, transforming your operations. You need to transform both. And it also becomes, again, you're never done, right? I was talking about, the continuous upskilling and transformation of the skills before. Well, I think fundamentally it's the same for the infrastructure, right? I think, again, the days of, you do migration for 6 months, you declare victory, and then, you're steady state for the next 7 years. I mean, again, that is, this will not happen anymore, right? This will be much more a continuous evolution and continuous, ongoing migration changes and continuous optimization of the estate, right? Because I think one of the challenges we are also facing as an industry is there have been a lot of bad surprises, right? There have been maybe a lot of false expectations. You move to the public cloud, it's all going to be easier, faster, and significantly cheaper. Well, it turns out this is not always the case, right? Because, again, unless you drastically change the way you operate in the public cloud, unless you, really do things differently, it actually doesn't end up being cheaper. It usually ends up being more expensive, right? So again, I think that's that constant mindset around, optimization, FinOps, and and it changes fundamentally that mindset. So I think, it's really about how to shape the journey together, both from a transformation and a run perspective. Maybe a bit of a long answer, but at least I saw there were several, aspects to that.
Okay. So Stefan, I know you are still on your journey to cloud and somewhere in between, but what's the reaction of the business so far? And what do you think they would say as far as things that are working well and maybe things that, they may want to work a little better?
Alors, my first answer is that the business, it was not very difficult to convince the business, especially the, let's say, top management of the business rapidly understood that due to the market, which is changing very rapidly, you will know that biotech are not very far from our business, and the overall pharma market is still under consolidation. If we want to remain competitive, if we want to be able to compete against this type of companies, it's important to evolve. And if we want to accelerate the time to market for new applications, if we want to integrate more and more innovation, it's really important to rely on the cloud to do so, because using our traditional IT is clearly slowing the way we are innovating. And if we don't want to disappear tomorrow, if we really want to remain in the top pharma companies in the world, the cloud is clearly the solution. So convincing the business that the cloud will bring a lot of value, and even if you do it well, savings at the end, was not so difficult. After, on a daily basis, when you work with the application teams that have to provide new features, new functionalities in the application, it's always not difficult, but long discussions in order to be sure that they understand why it is a priority and what it will bring to them to use the cloud tomorrow. Of course, as I said at the beginning, we are clearly not going to transform, recode all our applications to become cloud native. For the big majority of the landscape we have today, it will be more replatforming than transforming applications. However, for all the new applications that we are building, or for all the applications that are requiring a significant change due to their legacy debt, in that case, we are really working with the business, onboarding our solution architect to explain why transforming the application, relying more and more on cloud native services will at the end bring value, accelerate the time to market, and so on. And as soon as you have the right messages and the right skills, and we come back to the upskilling we just discussed previously, the business and the application team, they clearly understand the added value of the cloud. So it's not a so big difficulty. Even on some corporate applications, we found some levers to justify that the cloud was the good solution. To give you an example, we have a few SAP platforms at Sanofi, and one which was hosted in the APAC region was quite legacy, and we decided, working with the application team, to switch from an on-prem hosting solution to a cloud solution on AWS. So we are in the middle of the transformation of the SAP application on AWS Singapore. So far, everything is going well. Alors, the difficulty is not coming from the SAP application by itself, because moving an application, a SAP application on the cloud is not so difficult. We took this opportunity also to change some technical components. For example, moving from Oracle to HANA, moving from Unix, HP UX to Linux. But where we see the biggest difficulty, it's clearly when we start dealing with interfaces. And like many companies, we did a lot of customization of our SAP platforms. And now that we need to move this application to the cloud and in a way rework on these interfaces, we are discovering that it's not so easy. But again, we used that as a lever, and we explained and we worked with the application team in order to say, okay, some of your interfaces are over-customized, are not using some standards we have today at Sanofi. So let's take this opportunity to rework this interface, change the way it is working, change the technology behind, consolidate some interfaces, multiple in one, in order really to rely more and more on native services provided by AWS. And at the end, again, this specific journey will end in April, so the final move to production will be in April. But so far, we see a business which is following us, we see an application team very happy of the job we are doing all together. Again, it's new for everybody, so we are all discovering new things almost every day. But we are leveraging our solution architect, we are leveraging AWS, which is strongly involved in this program. And everybody seems to be very happy and very passionate by this transformation.
Okay. So a different question is, knowing what you know today, having been on this journey, if you knew everything that you know today when you started, what are some things that you might do differently? And the same goes for you, Philippe, from an Accenture perspective. What would you do differently? But we'll start with you, Stefan.
Okay. We said it many times, but involve the business as soon as possible. Involve the application team, explain what it will bring, what will be the consequences. It's, I think, a key success factor to such transformation. Another important element, I think, is related to the what we call the cloud foundations, or the cloud landing zone, you call it the way you want. As you said, Philippe, some people are thinking that because you go to the cloud, operations will disappear, everything will be cheaper, easier, blah, blah, blah. At the end, if you don't don't take the right decision, it will not be the case at all. And because again, the pharma world has a lot of regulatory rules and standards, and we had to work a lot on the foundations in order to be sure that they will be what we call in the pharma world qualified, and be sure that if tomorrow we have an audit or we need to justify what we are doing on the cloud to some specific regulatory instances, we will be fully compliant, which is the case today on-prem. But what I want to say is that we had to work on every services we will use tomorrow on the public cloud, AWS and GCP, not only to build something which will work, because creating a new service or using a new service on AWS, you can do it through the console in a few clicks. But on top of that, we really had to onboard the security team, the quality and compliance team, in order to be sure that these foundations will respect all the standards that we have in the pharma world. And I know that in many other IT domains, you have some constraints, like in the financial landscape, you also have some specific rules and standards that you have to respect. And this is what we discovered maybe a bit too late. And today, I think we are on track. But if we have known that earlier, we would have started building all the foundations maybe in a different manner, onboarding from the very beginning, as I said, the security team, the quality and compliance team, in order to be sure that we will have used these foundations as also a lever to transform the way quality and compliance team are working, security team are working, because the way you are managing security, compliance in the cloud has nothing to do with the way you are doing it on-prem. And today we are a bit struggled because we started discussing with these people a bit too late. It's difficult to ask them to change their processes, to change the way they are working, and for example, to build a new service on AWS. The technical part is done in a few days, but everything related to security and quality needs weeks, because we had to produce some documents, Word documents, instead of providing scripts that we are using to automate things, because again, we did not involve them earlier, I think, and we are suffering of that. We are more in a reactive mode than a proactive mode. It's something on which we are working with them in order to be more efficient, to include more automation, in order to not only have to write documents, but be sure that, for example, a Terraform script can be used as a proof that an infrastructure has been properly built on AWS. But the road is long, and clearly it's something that we completely forgot at the beginning of the program, and on which we are maybe suffering today.
Okay, Philippe.
Yeah, I mean, I would have 3 points that I think, I think 2 have already been mentioned, right? The very early involvement of the business, and very linked to that is, as early as possible, I think the application assessment, at least at the high level, the sooner the better, right? Because I think once you understand that, you can have much more informed, discussions and reflections on how to structure your approach, how to select, what goes to which cloud and so forth, right? So I think that's the first point. The second point, right, I think around the whole security, compliance, and early involvement of the right people. I mean, I've worked quite a lot in financial services as well, right? And a lot of similar, challenges, behaviors, sometimes a bit paranoia, for some people, right? And the sooner you involve them, they are part of the solution. You don't involve them, then it becomes a real problem, right? So for me, that's really a key point. The third point, and I think that's also reflecting not only over the last 9 months and what we have ahead of us, but also over the last couple of years or a few years. It's a ongoing, relentless focus on kind of questioning the status quo, right? Driving ongoing further improvements, further automation, and so forth, right? I think if you're too comfortable in a bit of a steady state, that's probably you're not doing your job, right? And I think to some extent, 10 years ago, I think Sanofi was absolutely, the program was to some extent years ahead of, what the rest of the industry was doing. And then it was, a bit of a nice, steady, and it was, both us and Sanofi were comfortable. I think the service was good and reliable and so forth. But, there was a bit of maybe, not challenging ourselves enough, right? So I think for me, that's the other big point. I think, and that will even be further the case, right? With the pace of technology, we need constantly to challenge ourselves, right? Are we driving as much automation, as much, analytics, as much intelligence as we should to continue optimizing? So the name of the game is constant optimization. So for me, those are the 3 points.
Okay. So any final thoughts from your side before I open it out for questions?
No.
Okay. All right.
Well, maybe one. I mean, for me, today everybody's doing cloud, right? I mean, I think they probably nobody would, and if they are not, nobody would actually dare to openly say I'm not doing cloud, right? That would be totally unacceptable. But I think there's still a huge opportunity in front of us, right? Again, as an industry, yes, everybody's doing cloud, but there are a lot more enterprises that are 10% in the cloud than 90% in the cloud, right? So I think the whole wave of kind of massive evolution and transformation, so forth, is still ahead of us, right? So, and I think for that reason, I think it's extremely exciting times because I think a lot of that will accelerate over the next 12 to 24 months. So I think we are definitely in a sweet spot and a sweet time, I think, for our business.
Okay, thank you. So let's see what questions people have for Stefan and Philippe.
Stefan, can you talk a little bit more about the decision to do both AWS and Google? What drove it? Was it IT, the business?
The main reason was clearly the complementarity between the two public cloud providers. So when we looked at all the services they are providing, taking into account what I explained on the data and analytics and the situation we are facing at Sanofi with many data lake or data lake-like solutions that we have today, we thought that having a strong partner focusing on data was really critical. And today, it's clearly the position that Google is pushing. They are the data company. As I said also, Sanofi was already a partner of Google. So we thought that from a data standpoint and all the IT-related topics around the data, it was making a lot of sense to work with Google. But we also looked at all the other part of our IT, compute, database, HPC, SAP, and so on. And we thought that maybe Google could be challengeable on some specific parts, and it was making also a lot of sense to use another actor. Clearly, we've rapidly focused on the two biggest ones in the market, AWS and Microsoft. And for some technical reasons, but not only technical reasons, when we did the detailed analysis, and also because our footprint on AWS was bigger than on Microsoft, we rapidly decided to stay with AWS instead of saying, okay, we'll have to move a certain number of workloads from AWS to Microsoft. I think that we are going to stick to this strategy to have 2 and only 2 public cloud providers quite a long time. Again, to upskill people and keep the right level of expertise internally is complex. The more cloud providers you have, the more complex it will be at the end. So it's really where we want to stick to our position. I don't know what will happen in 3 years, 5 years, but I think that at least for the next 3 years, where we will have the biggest part of our transformation with Accenture, we will remain on that position.
Other questions?
Did you design your private cloud, modernize it from traditional apps which stay on-prem? Did you design that private cloud to be able to be hybrid and to transition workloads to AWS?
Alors, it's a good question. Yes and no, but globally no. Let me explain why. We had, as I said, we are using a lot VMware on-prem, like many companies. It's our by default hypervisor, and we had many discussions with AWS on VMC, for example. Okay, VMC, it's VMware on AWS. And today, the position we are having at Sanofi is that maybe we will use VMC one day, but it will be more a backup solution if we cannot reach our target objective in terms of applications we want to move to the cloud. The idea is really to rely as much as we can on PaaS solutions, on containers, on cloud-native services on AWS, doing V2V from our private cloud to VMC on AWS. My personal position is that it does not really bring value. It's not, the cost difference moving a workload from on-prem to AWS, native, let's say native EC2 instances, or from on-prem to VMC is not so big. The technical part is maybe less expensive because less complex, but all the governance around, because you are not just doing a V2V without discussing with the application team, finding the right window, going to CAB to be sure that your change is approved and so on. At the end, the gap is not so, financially speaking, so important, and the value it will bring at the end is, for us, not there. So we said that maybe in 6 months, 1 year, we will reevaluate that position. We will see where we will be in our transformation, if we are reaching our objectives or not, and maybe rediscuss with VMware and AWS VMC as a potential solution. If you look at the other use cases to use VMC today, we don't have them. We don't have any data center space issues. If I need to remain in my data center for the next 3 years, if I need to grow, which is not our strategy, but if I need to do it, I can. I have some space. I don't have any end of lease coming soon, so I don't have any emergency to speed up my migration to the cloud and to rely on VMC. Basically, it is today the 2 biggest use cases that are pushed by VMware and AWS to use VMC. We are not in such situation. So today, no, clearly the answer is what should remain on-prem will remain there for good reasons. And the idea is not to move something on the private cloud and then having in mind to move it in the next 6 months or 1 year to the public cloud. So the idea is really private cloud if there is no other options, but by default public cloud. So we should not face such situation.
Thank you. To the coexistence of the apps and both on-prem and cloud, what is the effect of data gravity?
I did not get the question.
Data gravity? I'm sorry, yeah. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. The impact of data gravity with the apps sitting both on-prem and on the cloud. Have you guys considered that, and what's the tipping point for you?
Alors, that's a very good question, and I think the question is not only related to on-prem versus public cloud, but also between AWS and Google. And that's why, for sure, we will face the issue one day. 2 applications, one on-prem, one in the public cloud that needs to exchange data, or some data lakes that needs to replicate data. But that's why we built our location strategy having as a very important driver, maybe the first one, the integration between the different businesses. Who is discussing with who? Basically, do we need to exchange data between R&D and manufacturing, between R&D and commercials? And based on that, we build our eligibility matrix and say, because, again, it's a fake example, but because manufacturing data are not discussing with R&D data, we can locate them on separate locations, on-prem or public cloud. But as soon as we identify that some businesses are exchanging or will exchange a lot of data in the future, we said that it should make more sense to locate them in the same place. And we will apply that also for on-prem applications, even if, as I said, the idea is really to move as many applications as we can. Another part of the answer is the data strategy that we are having, building an enterprise data lake that will rely on all the different data lakes we will have or we are having today at Sanofi, in order to be sure that what we will present in terms of data to the applications will be built in an efficient manner, adding some data virtualization solutions like Denodo, for example, adding some meta catalog, so data catalog on top of that. Again, we are working on this data strategy because it's a very complex topic. But the idea is really because, again, we know that things will not be black or white. Data will have to be moved from on-prem to AWS, from AWS to Google, from Google to on-prem. We are really building this data strategy, having that in mind, and be sure that what we will present at the end from a data standpoint to these applications will be as efficient as possible. But it's clearly a very, very difficult topic.
So quick follow-up to that. You mentioned your data strategy and the governance. I'm kind of curious, with multiple data lakes, how are you enforcing the governance and the integrity of data across all those different lakes?
Again, a difficult question. To be honest with you, it's a bit too early in our data strategy to be able to clearly answer your question. I can try to guess, but I'm not going to provide you some facts or figures in order to answer your question, so I prefer not answering.
It's not an easy answer.
No. Again, data strategy is a very difficult topic. Yeah. The way you are organizing your data, the way you are cataloging your data, the virtualization layer you are putting on top of that. No, it's a very difficult topic. Yeah.
So we're almost out of time. I think we have time for maybe one more question if somebody has one.
In terms of innovation, what has the cloud enabled you to do specifically within the realm of pharma? In terms of innovation, what has Sanofi achieved in terms of business innovation?
I'm gonna share with you one or two concrete examples of things we are doing. One very famous topic is we had some presentation this morning is real world evidence, for example. So when you are doing real world evidence on-prem, you need to build many different layers. The data you are managing to collect the right facts and the right proof in order to be able to build scenario and to provide at the end some concrete use cases is very costly, very long, very complex. By relying on the cloud, we significantly accelerated the way we are building some use cases, and we are running some real-world evidence scenarios. Today, not all our real-world evidence infrastructure are on AWS, but a big part of it is located today on AWS. And compared to the way we were doing that previously, we significantly improve the time to deliver new scenarios. We significantly reduce the complexity of the infrastructure, and our agility has nothing to do compared to what we were doing on-prem. Another example maybe is what we call multi-channel engagement. So basically the way we are dealing with all the data we have on customers, some salespeople, and so on. And we are running a huge number of campaigns, for example, on a monthly basis, relying on a public cloud infrastructure, because this public cloud infrastructure is very agile, very scalable, compared to the way we were doing things on-prem just before. So it's two very simple examples. One more, let's say, R&D driven, one more commercial driven. But by relying on cloud solutions and cloud native services, which is the case today for these two specific use cases, we significantly reduced the complexity of such infrastructure. Our agility to run multiple marketing campaigns compared to what we were doing on-prem has nothing to do. And at the end, it's even more efficient because the solutions that you can plug on the data in order to analyze data and to generate the reports, the target for your marketing campaigns and so on, or the real-world evidence scenarios that you are running are far more efficient at the end.
Okay.
So I think with that, we're actually over time. So thank you so much, Stefan and Philippe, for joining us today. It was a really good discussion, and thank you for sharing, your journey and, what lies ahead and so on. And thank you all for attending. Hopefully you found this, very interesting as well as informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.